I'm really sorry I couldn't be there in person, and also I'm sorry my voice is a bit low. I have a bit of a cold, but hopefully you can hear me okay. Yeah, you can see the title of my paper on the screen, and I'm a PhD candidate in the latter stages of my doctoral project at Humboldt University in Berlin. Just briefly to um, sorry to the structure of this presentation, I'm going first to provide a brief overview of the overall doctoral project, and then say a few words about the case study. Then I'm going to zoom in on the spatial approach that I adopt in this analysis in this paper, and then hopefully provide some inputs on more specifically on encounters and creative practice. So the overall PhD project is called Religious Communities as Key Actors in the Afro-European Migration Context, as a case study from Berlin, Germany. It's an interdisciplinary project. So I have my main supervisor, Professor Simoyoki from the theology faculty, but then I'm co-supervised by an anthropologist, Professor Römhild, and also by Professor Settler, who's a sociologist of religion at the KwaZulu-Natal University in South Africa. The project is part of an international research training group called Transformative Religion. I'm based at Humboldt, but the group is a collaboration between Humboldt and three universities in South Africa. So these are the research outputs that are part of the dissertation. It's a cumulative dissertation. I'm not going to go into them, of course, but just to say that I'm drawing mainly on the third article that's listed here. It's currently in press at Diaconia, and the article is called Religious Space Sharing, Encounters and Negotiations between the St. Georgis Eritrean Orthodox Church and the St. Paul's congregation in Berlin, Germany. Sorry, again. The Just to the case study, to say a few words about the case study. This church, this Eritrean Orthodox Church, was formed in 2015 by refugees who survived border violence in Libya and often also in Europe. They met at the Asylum Seeker Reception Center not far from Berlin in 2015, as I said, and one of them was a priest who had previously worked in a refugee camp in Ethiopia, so had a lot of experience in also providing not only spiritual but also social support to displaced people, and mostly to fellow Eritreans. And then they had a long period, around 3 years, from 2015 to 2018, kind of trying to establish themselves, and also had an internal conflict within the Eritrean Orthodox community in Berlin over alleged kind of support to the Eritrean regime. So the community split, and the bigger part of the community, which is the one I was working with for the project, managed to kind of be recognized officially as church from the Eritrean, from the church in Asmara, and since 2018 they have been hosted by the St. Paul's congregation, which is this Lutheran Protestant church in the neighborhood of Berlin-Zehlendorf. It's kind of on the southern periphery of the city. So I just wanted to say that because there's a history of kind of political conflict in the diaspora as a background to the example of coexistence with the St. Paul's Lutheran congregation, which is, I think, important to bear in mind. And it's also, I think, a sign of the struggle and the kind of the agency that the community showed in establishing themselves despite all these tensions and also hardship, also financial hardship and hardship in finding a space to carry out their activities. And also, I want to say a few words about the Sempos congregation, which has a strong presence in the neighborhood. Besides religious services, it has a long-standing and well-organized community kitchen program. It has a focus on musical activities. It provided German lessons to and other types of support to refugees and asylum seekers during the so-called refugee crisis. So it has a history of social engagement and dialogue and kind of support to refugees, but also it faces challenges from a declining and aging membership to the need to undertake costly renovations and the shrinking availability of funds. This is connected to what I want to say about the current issues affecting the local context, just maybe in a very superficial and quick way, but I do want to point out that at the moment and in the last 10 to 20 years, there has been a sharp rise in housing costs and overall housing crisis, as well as a rise in populism, especially right-wing populism, and also a rise in social isolation, which is probably also connected to the other two phenomena. But yeah, just a few more words about what the Eritrean Orthodox Church does, the St. Georgis Church does in offers to its members. They offer different types of services, so not only religious activities, but also activities that are related to children, youth, and families, and that focus on health, mental health, and spiritual support. Of course, I can provide more details, but it's a wide range of services from language classes to and translation services, but also kind of awareness raising, consultancy, as well as, of course, spiritual support. Okay, so moving on. I also want to just clarify what methodologies I used in the study. So I used a combination of semi-structured interviews, qualitative interviews, participant observation, and primary text analysis. I don't speak Tigrinya. That was a big challenge and a big limitation to the study. And also, I'm not part of the Eritrean, of course, community, but also not of the St. Paul's congregation. So I had a completely outsider perspective, and this, while it was a challenge, it was also kind of a way for me to maintain a certain level of awareness of the kind of the need to not to get caught up in my own expectations that I might have had. Of course, I had my own expectations as a researcher, as an outsider, but I would have had others as an insider as well. So I was in a place of discomfort at times, as probably also my research participants, because of being an outsider, but that also kept me kind of aware of my positionality and hopefully more open to listening to my participants' voices. Okay, so this is the church. It has three buildings. The Eritrean Orthodox Church occupies the building that you see on the right-hand side, so the parish hall, while the main church that you see on the top left and the small kind of village church are mostly not used by the Eritrean Orthodox Church, but only by the St. Paul's congregation. And in the parish hall, they mostly their activities mostly take place in the on the first floor, where there's a big hall, and also several rooms on the ground floor, first floor, and in the basement that they progressively came to occupy, and that they use for different purposes. There's also an office that's occupied by the Eritrean priest permanently now. Um, and so when I came to know the community a little bit better, I thought it became apparent to me that adopting a spatial approach, so looking at the space and how it was occupied by the two communities and shared between them was important, was very relevant, also in their own accounts. So I also noticed in the literature that there was quite a lot of studies. There were quite a lot of studies addressing, these interactions between migrant churches and local churches, so to say. But not a lot of them actually dealt with the material aspects of their space sharing practices. Um, and also the literature on multi-religious spaces, both in Germany and also internationally, often focused on top-down initiatives and not on bottom-up grassroots initiatives. Also, not a lot of literature was kind of dedicated to the Eritrean diaspora, at least not in Germany, not in Berlin. And so I decided to draw on the idea of space as relational, as in Massey, and also I tried to combine the literature on religious placemaking and place sharing in migration contexts with the literature on hospitality, but most interestingly, perhaps today, on embodied encounters in religious contexts. Not only in terms of religious encounters, but also taking, from literature on multicultural contexts more in general, such as in Askins, for example. So. Um, just to kind of provide an overview of what I found. I think my overall takeaway was that encounters between religious communities, at least in this context, weren't necessarily or not only about theological dialogue, or in this case, ecumenical dialogue, and that place sharing wasn't necessarily or not only about conviviality and about spending time together. For example, the relationship and space sharing practices in this context, it didn't develop along religious lines, at least for the first 6 to 7 years, but rather on a continuous negotiation and trust building process that was full of bumps in the road, and required advanced mediation and communication skills. And while the two communities still conduct activities separately, there's a way in which they have learned to deal with the challenges that emerged, for instance, regarding children's activities and how loud they are, how messy they are, or cleaning practices and how they are understood or carried out differently by the two groups, responsibility on certain issues, etc. And so I think this, in a sense, provides a valuable example of the church as a heterotopic space, as Wheeler calls it. So a space which is kind of not only a church as we might imagine it, a place where religious practices take place, but also space for negotiation well beyond strict religious activities. And then also in this context, I think these negotiations were important, but they sometimes were experienced only by a very small group within the communities. So some members within the two communities had the motivation and the drive and maybe the ability, I don't know, to actually build these relationships and carry out these negotiations. But they, in the end, had an effect on the whole group. So had a very clear impact on the lives and experiences of the community more widely, more broadly. So one key example, if I may, and then I'll draw to a close, but was the testimony of an interviewee from the Lutheran congregation, the St. Paul's congregation, who would at the same time use paternalistic terms to describe the relationship between the two communities, but also this person was key to establishing concrete collaboration and to obtain more space for the Eritrean community, because she was in charge of opening and closing the church for them during the first few years where the trust wasn't at a hadn't reached a level where they were doing that independently. So didn't have the keys, and so she was the one who became more aware of their needs and was kind of confronted with the issues that they were facing within the community. These issues included mental health issues that led to suicidal attempts, for example. So she was really aware of the gravity and the urgency of them having more space and more time to carry out their activities. Of course, their activities are not do not solve these issues necessarily completely, but the community members were asking for that. And so it's a complex picture where these negotiations and these relationships can be both reproducing inequalities, but also facilitate the breaking of barriers or increased collaboration and more practices that are more fruitful for the groups. Okay, so do I still have time? Do I have 2 minutes?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll just say quickly something about what I would like to do next. So maybe not necessarily with a focus on the same case study, but I'm taking this as an example since we're talking about this. So there was an aspect that really became clear to me during the later stages. So the latter stages, and I didn't include it in the PhD project, but I would like to develop it in the future. And it's the aspect of visibility, invisibility, and also audibility and inaudibility. And because, as you can see, some of the celebrations and services took place or take place outside the church, but also when they take place inside the church, it's very loud and it can get very loud because singing and music is a big part of the liturgy. And also they start very early in the morning. So it's a presence that's very much felt in the neighborhood and also at the train station, also because of how they dress simply. It's a presence that's very clear in the neighborhood. I think I would like to include other methods when looking at these types of encounters and presence and transformations in the local society. But what I mean by using other methods is not necessarily showing pictures or doing recordings, but rather thinking of methodologies of co-production of audio and visual material that seek to express and reflect how people in their own lived experiences perceive these changes and these sounds and these changes in sounds and in the soundscapes and in the landscape, and what meaning these changes have for them and in their daily lives. But this is just a glimpse, and I'm sorry, I know it's really early stages. It's just ideas for the future. And thank you so much for having